This week, we're taking the first subject matter, which is, who am I? So last week, we gave a little more emphasis to speaking about the importance of that question. In the Vedic scriptures, the very beginning of the Vedanta Sutra, the word Ved means knowledge, and Anta means the conclusion or the end of all knowledge. Sutra means sort of verses that speak to the conclusive nature of the absolute truth. So the very first of those verses says, Atato Brahma Jigyasya, that now, and this word atato or now means in the human form of life. Atato Brahma Jigyasya. The word Brahma means we should inquire about the absolute truth. So certainly we have some identity as part of that absolute truth. So that's the question that's being prompted of us to ask in this life once we come to the human stage. Within the animal kingdom, they don't have that capacity. Within the animal kingdom, only 4 functions of consciousness are present. Although there may be personality nuances, there are only 4 functions: ahara, nidra, boya, and maituna. So eating, sleeping, procreation, and defending oneself, or protecting or sustaining one's existence. So those are the only 4 activities that manifest in the animal kingdom, although that may be done with many nuances of whatever particular karmic portfolio exists within that animal. So the animal species don't produce karma per se, but there are nuances, because even some human beings, having not fulfilled their human potential and acted in such a way, can fall back to the animal species. And the nuances that you see in animals, every individual dog, cat, bird, etc., have something to do with the nuance of that soul being in that animal body. So, but the human form of life affords the greatest possibility, which is to inquire what is the absolute truth and what is my relationship to the absolute truth. So in our contemporary history, no more than 500 years ago, there was a very, very great scholar. There were 2 brothers, actually. They were from the Indian subcontinent, from South India, and due to some political intrigue, they ended up coming to Bengal. When they arrived in Bengal, their names were Santosh and Amar. And they had also another younger brother named Anupam, and he had a son whom he named Jiva. So obviously I'm talking about Rupa, Sanatana, Anupam, and Jiva Goswami. But before they were known as that, they were simply known as Santosh and Amar. They came to Bengal, to the city of Ramkeli. And there, once they were by a river and they were taking bath and doing the duties of Brahmins at the bathing ghat there in that particular place. And there was one Muslim ruler in that area, and he had an edifice built to himself, a huge tower, glorifying his achievements and his activities. And he called his minister, the person who was his closest advisor. That person also brought with him the architect of that edifice. And as they climbed the tower, then the king began to glorify how beautiful the tower was and how this tower was the greatest tower he had ever seen. When they reached to the height of the tower and they came out onto the roof area and they overlooked the area which that particular Muslim ruler was ruling, and he said, "Just see, standing on the most beautiful tower in the world, I'm looking over the kingdom which I'm ruling." So by this time, the architect had developed some pride in his work, and he blurted out, "I could even do better than this." Immediately upon hearing that, the Muslim ruler thought, "I never want anything to exceed this." And then he took that, he had his soldiers take that architect and throw him over the roof to his death. And then he immediately looked at his minister with a very fierce eye, and he called out, "Oh, Mantri." Mantri means minister. And as soon as the minister heard him call out in such a strong voice and with such a piercing look, the minister took off without waiting to hear what the next saying of the Muslim ruler was going to be, and he ran immediately. So he ran and he ran throughout the city for some hours, and he finally came to rest at that riverbank where both Amar and Santosh were there doing their activities. So Amar and Santosh, being very compassionate persons, looked at the distress in the face of that minister and inquired from him what had happened. So the minister, he said, listen, I just experienced something that was very frightful, and my position is now in grave danger. I'm the minister to the Muslim ruler here, and the Muslim ruler, being unhappy with the statement of the architect of his new wonder that he's had built, threw the architect from the roof to his demise, and then called out my name. And in fear, I simply ran away without waiting to hear what he had to say. So now I'm perplexed about what I should do. I don't feel safe to return to the kingdom, nor do I know how to solve the problem which is at hand. So of the two brothers, Santosh, he mentioned, listen, all you need to do is to gather many of the leading architects and builders in that area. You should have a meeting with them, and you should advise them that when you take them back to the kingdom, and you should give them some reward, you should mention to them that each one of them should declare that this particular building is the greatest building they've ever seen, and nobody will be able to replicate it or exceed it. So the minister then became very happy, and he went on to ask, where can I find you two brothers? You are so intelligent, and I know that the ruler will certainly want to reward you for your brilliance. So then Santosh told him, no, we don't want any reward for our activity. This is the nature of helping those who are in need. So the minister became very attracted by the behavior and the sadhu nature, the saintly nature of Santosh and Amar. And he went back to the Muslim ruler along with all of the architects and builders whom were suggested by Santosh that he should do. He took them all back, and as planned, as they entered into the edifice, the tower, they all began glorifying it from the bottom of the stairs to the halls, to the walls, to the paint, to the structure. And when they reached the height of the roof, they all unanimously declared nothing could ever be built to exceed this. The Muslim ruler became extremely happy to hear this praise, and he embraced his minister, but he asked, listen, I was about to give you an order, but you ran off. So the minister said, oh, ruler, I am so much your servant that immediately when you called my name with such strength, I knew your desire, and I went to fulfill it. So then the Muslim ruler became very happy, and he gave a huge reward to his minister. So after thinking about it and thinking about the saintly nature of Amar and Santosh, the minister came to the Muslim ruler and said, actually, I have another gift for you. I know you have many scholars in your court, but I met two gentlemen today. They are accomplished in language, science, mathematics. Their person is very beautiful to look at. May I bring these two persons? In fact, if I'm being honest, Muslim ruler, these two brothers gave me the insight to bring the best of builders. He didn't tell the secret part, but he told that he was advised to take these builders there by these two brothers. So the Muslim ruler became very interested to meet them. Those two brothers, when they were brought before the Muslim ruler said, having understood your intelligence and your qualification, and having seen the beauty of both of you, I want you to come into my government. One of you will become my personal minister, and the other one also will become the treasurer of my kingdom. Those two brothers were Rupa and Sanatana. Understand? That Sanatana Goswami, when Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu came to visit Ramakeli, both brothers for the first time met Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and after meeting him, their hearts were completely changed. So though they stayed involved in the Muslim government for some time, and their names had been changed to acknowledge their affiliation with the Muslim government, their names were changed to Dabir Khas and Shakir Malik. So, but Mahaprabhu, when he met them, he gave them the names Rupa and Sanatana. You understand? And he also gave the younger brother the name Anupam. You understand? So in this way, the brothers developed a deep relationship with Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Once when that very Sanatana Goswami was able to meet with Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, I'm not telling the whole story because we won't get to our point, but once he was able to meet with Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and though he was so intelligent, he was so highly accomplished, he was so wealthy, he was from such an aristocratic family, he got down on his knees and he asked Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, listen, Keami, kene am I? Jare tapatrai. Keami, who am I? Kene am I? Jare tapatrai. And why am I suffering? Even though he was so intelligent, even though he had everything in this material world, he realized that the most important question he could ask was not how to increase all of these material things, but how to understand the true nature of who am I and why am I suffering? The second part of the question, Kene am I? Jare tapatrai, is also very significant. He never asked, please tell me how I'm enjoying life. Please tell me what is the best road to happiness. He asked, Kene am I? Jare tapatrai, why am I suffering? This question, even though it lurks in the heart of everyone, no one really asks. Because we're actually afraid. We're actually afraid to face the very things that we experience in day-to-day life that cause suffering. Because there's an intrinsic quality in our original nature, which is adverse to suffering, which is adverse to death, which is the extinction of our temporal existence. So by asking this question, who am I, but also why am I suffering, he set the table for the essential question to be asked by every intelligent person. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu answered him in a very synopsis way, means very concise way. He said, Jivera Sarup Hoye Krishnera Nitya Das. He said that you are a jiva. The word jiva in Sanskrit means you are an individual part of the eternal spiritual energy coming from God. And all of those individual particles of energy coming from God are individual souls, which are called atmas. So remember, the individual identity is the atma. The energy they're composed of is called jiva shakti or jivas. That's why sometimes you hear the word jivatma. And then he told the reason that you are suffering is because by nature you are a servant of God. Hoye Krishnera Nitya Das. But having entered into a consciousness of being unaware of that, you're now acting in a false consciousness. And due to that false consciousness, so many different types of suffering have come about. These sufferings come primarily in three ways. They are called adi atmic. The word adi atmic means those sufferings which arise from our own body and mind. Adi bautic, those sufferings that we experience in relating to others. And adi daivik means those sufferings which come from all of the natural occurrences, whether it's hurricanes, fires, storms, whatever it might be. So he says every single jiva who is unaware of their original constitutional nature of being a servant of God must face, not as a punishment, but just as a organic reality to not being aware of your original nature. By nature, these three kinds of suffering arise. And because it is not your real nature, it cannot have an eternal existence. Therefore, the existence is mapped out according to your karma. You'll receive so many years. It's just like you go and you purchase a credit card. That credit card comes with a date when it has to be renewed, right? Not only that, but it comes with a sheet of all these little writings with all the terms and conditions. So in the same way, our material existence has all of these terms and things that we have to follow in this life, right? According to our karmic portfolio. And it has an expiration date. That expiration, or the idea of the extinguishing of our existence, is also unnatural to the Atma, or the soul. And therefore, naturally, everybody has either a fear, reluctance, or avoidance of what is called death. Understand? So, besides the three miseries I mentioned, Adhyatmic, Adibautic, and Adidaivic, again, those miseries coming from the body and mind, those coming from interactions with others, and those coming from natural disturbances, there are also four essential miseries built into existence: birth, old age, disease, and death. So certainly we can experience at old age the resultant diseases that come from the breakdown of this temporary body in the form of diseases and sufferings, etc. And ultimately death are certainly miserable. But why do we put birth in that category? Normally when anybody's born, everybody celebrates. So why is birth put in that category of one of the miseries? Because the birth is simply the igniting or the initiating of the process of old age, disease, and death. Can you name one person who has lived in this body eternally? Death rate is 100%. Can you name one person, I don't care what their social status is, their status of their wealth, who can say they've gone through the entire life, whatever period of time it is, and have not had one incident of suffering in any way, form, or fashion? So on both of those counts, even if you call out all the statisticians, the rate is 100%. So then he told, Jivera Sarupoya Krishna Nitya Das, Jivera Tatashta Shakti Bed Abed Prakash. The reason that you're suffering is because though your original nature is that you're the servant of God, in the absence of that knowledge, you have developed a what is called tatashta. The word tatashta means a marginal disposition. Marginal means that though by nature you're spiritual, the absence of your knowledge of your spirituality puts you in a position where the influence of the material energy can come about and cover you. Just like I'm giving the example. If you take a small cup of water, right? That small cup of water is H2O. What is the composition of the water in the ocean? H2O. They're not different. But if you take that small cup and you put it right on the shore of the ocean, what will happen when the waves come? It'll be completely overtaken because of its minute size. So the Atma, or the Jivatma, or the soul is like that. And material energy is like the waves of the ocean, except the nature of the energy is different. So even though the composition of the soul is also like the composition of God in a qualitative sense, it is also, I'll get to that later on, but because of its minute size, it can be overcome by the material energy. So what happens when it's overcome? Duality arises. And therefore, for the most part, people have existence on two planes, material or spiritual. And so long as a person has not come in contact with the knowledge of their spiritual nature, they're completely dominated by the material nature or the material plane. That material plane presents to us 24 different factors. So I'm naming them now. I'll name them in English. The first of these factors is called the false ego. The word egoism means a sense of identity, a sense of self-conception. But the adjective here, false ego, indicates that it's not real. Because what the nature of our ignorance in relation to our actually being servants of God, the nature of that ignorance, Haribo Shambhala Prabhu. So the nature of that ignorance presents us with a false egoism that says, not only am I not the servant of God, but I am myself. The very Sanskrit word for false ego is aham kara. Aham, K-A-R-A, kara. So this word ahamkara means I. The word aham means I. Kara has two meanings. I am the cause and I am the doer of everything in my purview. This is called ahamkar. So now the question becomes, is this just right off the, or they say, I think young people say off the rip, right? Right off the bat. Is that possibly true? Are we the actual cause and doer of everything in our purview? The first question would have to be asked, can we even guarantee, and if you can, raise your hand, can you guarantee that you're going to take the next breath? If you can, please raise your hand. Everyone is completely dependent, but we don't recognize it. But we propel ourselves as the cause and the doer of everything in our material purview. Yet we can't even guarantee we'll take the next breath. Therefore, the egoism called the ahamkara is false. The next thing is the mind. So, of course, in modern psychology, they attribute so many different functions to the mind. But in the Vedic cosmology, the mind only does two things. It accepts or rejects what is presented to it by the external stimuli coming through the intelligence. All it does is make a resolution to accept something or reject it. The next thing is the actual function of the intelligence. And what is the intelligence? The intelligence is like a database of all of your previous experiences, even from other lives. Because the soul is eternal, the soul exists in a continuum. It's not one and done. If that was the case, how would you account for all of the varieties of people right at birth? How can one person be born with a certain condition, another person be born in a different condition, another person born in a certain social status, another person born in a different social status, person born with a certain physical or mental condition, another person born in a different mental or physical condition? What is accounting for that variety? If everything is simply you come into existence, then you live for some time and die, and that was it, how do you account for that variety? Even if you're completely atheistic, there still has to be an explanation for the variety and diversity of people, even at the time of birth. So, of course, the Vedic cosmology has a very clear answer for it. This is called karma. Karma means whatever activities we perform, there is an equal and opposite reaction. That's also a scientific principle. So whatever we've done, even in a previous life, operates as a continuum and comes into the next life and starts from day one, right at conception, feeding you all of the reactions to whatever was done previously. And then we create new actions and therefore new reactions in this life. Those reactions which we don't account for by the time this life is over, it works in the continuum of another life. So the intelligence is the database of all of these lives' experiences. Besides these three things, which are subtle. So these three things, they comprise what is called the antakaran or subtle body. So what is a subtle body? At nighttime, when we put this physical body on the bed, has anyone here on this conference ever had a dream? Even if you're the most sound sleeper, somebody's had a dream at some point. Well, if this body's on the bed, what's doing all of the experiences in the quote dream? It's simply proof that there is another state of existence which replicates the material identity we have, but is not acting on the physical body, but rather a subtle body, right? That body is composed of mind, intelligence, and false egoism. It is called the subtle body, or in Sanskrit, the antakaran, or sukshma sharira. That body also has its own activity. So when you dream at night, that's all going on in the subtle body, right? Now, besides that, There is a physical body made of earth, water, fire, air, and ether. Everything that you look at in this material world is simply composed of those 5 things. Can anyone name something that's not composed of earth, water, fire, air, and ether, or some transmutation of those things? Everything is composed of that. So our physical body is also composed of earth, water, fire, air, and ether. Besides that, the nature of the subtle body produces a way for us to act through this earth, water, fire, and ether. Earth, water, fire, air, and ether, in and of themselves, are like dead matter. Until the soul, the active principle of life, enters into that earth, water, fire, and ether, it's all dead. If you go around and you look at any rock, stones, whatever, of course, there are nuances in consciousness, but basically it's like dead matter. Or better still, if you see a body after the soul has left that body, right? It's nothing but dead matter. The same shape is there. And especially if there was no trauma to the body, then you can see all of the same features. Everything is there, but the very essence of its existence or life is missing. What was carrying that life? The body's there. If the passing was fresh, 1 hour ago, 2 hours ago, 1 day ago, you can still go and see the body's right there, fresh. What's missing? It is the soul. And when the soul is present in the body, the subtle body also performs different functions. So besides earth, water, fire, and ether, there are 5 senses for acquiring stimuli and 5 senses for acting. The 5 senses for acquiring stimuli are the eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, and the tactile sense through our skin. The 5 senses to act according to that stimuli are speech, the hands, the feet, our procreative elements, the genitalia, and our evacuation facility. So these 24 things, right, they compose the entire existence of the material arena and the soul's combination with it. Now, I mentioned before, those are 24 elements. So that includes the soul. We had 20 elements. Then you had earth, water, fire, and ether. That was 23. The principle of life itself, or the soul, is the 24th element. But we mentioned the soul is not the doer. We cannot even guarantee I'll take the next breath, or people would say, I'm not going to stop breathing ever. You understand? If we had that control, we would decide, hey, I'm going to stay here. I'm not going to stop breathing at all. But that's not in our control. So it indicates axiomatically that there's a 25th principle. That 25th principle is divinity itself. In Sanskrit, it's called the Paramatma, or the presence of God that accompanies each individual soul. So here, these 25 factors make up the entire plane of the material existence. 2 elements within those 25 are actually transcended to it. It means they're in a different position and they're vicariously associating with the other 23. The 2 elements which are transcended are the soul and the super soul of Paramatma. The soul and the super soul is like the overseeing, sanctioning authority. Your next breath is sanctioned by whom? If it's not sanctioned by us, it's sanctioned by, even if you don't want to give it any nomenclature or anything, it's sanctioned by a power higher than us. Because again, common sense is, if I have my way, I won't stop breathing. You understand? So if somebody else is making that determination and all we're doing is witnessing the phenomenon, well, that's because the body became too old or the body became unusable due to trauma. That's just looking at the external phenomenon. But that's not still looking at the point, who's controlling breath? Who's controlling life in that body? The fact that the reasoning why the body no longer accommodated breath is one thing. But the fact that somebody else is controlling it, because even some people go through no trauma, simply at a certain time, the body gets too old and they can't accommodate breath anymore. Who's controlling that? So the soul and that super soul are transcendent to those other 23 elements. Now, what is the relationship between the soul and those 23 elements? Is it an actual connection, a physical connection? The answer is no. The answer is it's vicarious. What do I mean by that? Just as when you watch a movie on a TV screen or on a movie theater, we look at the screen, the stimuli of the plot, the characters, the action in the movie come into our eyes, into our ears, etc., and creates a connection vicariously with the plot, the characters, and so forth and so on. When we invest emotional content in that plot, characters, etc., we go through the emotions of like being in the movie. That's why if it's a horror movie and you see the person about to walk into the place where the killer is, everybody goes, don't go there. Don't go. You understand? If you observe people looking at a movie, you'll see they're going through the emotional content of that movie. If it is a sad movie, they cry. If it's a happy movie, they still may cry, but in happiness. Yet they have nothing to do with the actual movie being shot in Hollywood or Atlanta or wherever it's being shot. But they're giving emotional investment vicariously through watching it on a TV screen. In the exact same way, the soul, looking at what is called the chitta, which is the sheet of consciousness that separates the soul from the material elements that I mentioned earlier, looks at that screen of the chitta or consciousness and vicariously identifies with those 23 elements that I mentioned earlier. And by emotional investment, it integrates itself only vicariously into the experience of this material world and the particular karmic drama that gets played out in each individual life. Does everybody follow me so far? So that's what's happening, and that's how the soul becomes involved in the material world. Now, we just admitted that the soul and the super soul are actually in a transcendent position. That means the soul is something different from these 23 elements. The soul is something different. So what exactly is the soul? We already mentioned that the soul is a potency or the energy coming from the absolute divinity. The nature of that energy is called Jiva Shakti. The word Jiva means like it's a kind of energy. And the Atma are individual parts of that energy. Now, each Atma has three qualities. One quality is that the very nature of the Atma is that it is Sat. The word Sat means it is eternal or ever existing. It can never be not existing. The Atma is always existing. So that means for the soul itself, can there be something called death? It's not possible. The very quality and nature of the soul is that it is eternal. The energy of God is eternal, and the soul is a part of that energy, so it is eternal. The second thing is the soul, when it is awakened by spiritual influence, can realize itself, therefore, it has spiritual cognition. It has the ability to realize itself separate from those 23 elements. The third thing is that the very nature of the soul is called dukkha pratyogita. The word dukkha means misery. It is the complete opposite of what misery is. Therefore, in the actual Atma or soul, there is no misery. So now a quandary comes because, wait a minute, if there's no misery in the soul and I'm the soul, how did I experience unhappiness or misery? How did that happen? Just like if you take two chemicals, those chemicals in and of themselves may not have any incendiary or explosive qualities. But when you mix them together, then the combination of these two chemicals creates incendiary or explosive activity. In the same way, when you mix the spiritual nature of the soul vicariously with the material elements, it creates what is called misery. You understand? So the misery is an organic reaction to mixing the eternal soul with the temporal 23 material elements. Does everybody get this idea? Just like you take two chemicals, and the two chemicals in and of themselves, you wouldn't get an explosion or any incendiary activity. But when you mix them, the nature of the chemicals, when they mix, they cause incendiary or fire activity or explosion, right? So in the same way, misery is the byproduct of the artificial mixing of the soul with the 23 material elements. That gives rise to what is called misery. The igniting principle in that is called false egoism. The false ego is like the igniter that ignites the connection and causes misery, causes us to identify with the karmic drama, etc., etc. So the soul has these three qualities. It is eternal, has the ability for cognition of the spiritual reality, and it has no misery. Because of that, as soon as one takes up a path to understand the reality of the self, there are different levels which are experienced by the soul according to what path of realization the soul takes up. So let me give you an example. If the soul takes to a process which emphasizes simply the distinction between those 23 material elements and the soul itself, the byproduct that will come from that will be recognition of eternal existence, recognition that I am not part of the material energy, those 23 elements. The result of that will simply be the absence of that misery. You understand? It's simply the absence of that misery. It is not necessarily a high-class spiritual bliss. It is simply that there is no misery present. So if you study teachings like in Buddhism, they speak about nirvana. Nirvana is based on this kind of principle. The simple absence of misery due to the absence of any connection with the material energy. Now, if the soul goes further, it realizes itself to be an aspect or a particle of the overall spiritual energy. That spiritual energy itself contains an element of ananda or bliss or spiritual happiness. So when the soul now identifies with this spiritual energy, which is of the same quality as the soul itself, it experiences an organic rise in its ananda or bliss based on its association with that spiritual energy, even when that spiritual energy is not clearly defined. You understand? So they're connected to their organic nature of themselves because the spiritual energy is also Sat, Chit, and Ananda. So now there's a kind of organic connection with it. Inherent in that energy is the Ananda principle. So one actually experiences spiritual bliss, but that spiritual bliss is sort of growing. It's not at its height. It is simply growing now due to one, the absence of misery. Now an additional feature has been added. The additional feature is that it's connected to actual Ananda or spiritual blissful energy. But the actual recognition of my spiritual identity, the recognition of the absolute spiritual identity of God or Krishna or Allah, etc., that has not been realized yet. Only the nature of being spiritual itself. The next iteration is one realizes the distinct difference between the personhood of divinity and their own individual personhood. This is the third iteration. And as soon as you recognize the two objectives, one, the absolute divinity, and then your own subjective spiritual identity, that creates an elevation in the bliss. You understand? Because now the source of that spiritual energy has been identified. And now the source of that spiritual energy is realized to be in persona. One of the difficulties in getting to that was that all of the things that we experience as misery in the material arena were also experienced among persona. You understand? So one of the things that happens when we start looking at spiritual realization is the rejection of anything which is persona. Because all of my experiences have been everything that I've experienced as far as interaction with persona is concerned, my own individual persona, the persona of dealing with others, it has all been the sources where I experienced misery. So now going into the spiritual domain, we tend to reject persona. But then you have to stop and think. If there was persona in the creation, how could it not be there in the creator? How can you have something in the creation that's not in the creator? You understand? It's not possible. Just like if you see the ingenuity that's displayed in art, music, science, whatever it might be, how could that ingenuity or inspiration manifest in the creation of a piece of music if it didn't originate from the person who wrote the music? So the principle has to exist in the person to be manifest in the creation. So now the third iteration of spiritual unfoldment is recognizing the personhood or the persona of spiritual reality, my own spiritual persona and the persona of the absolute truth or the absolute divinity or God. Then the next thing is a consciousness or cognition of a relation to that absolute person. That's the fourth iteration of spiritual unfoldment and spiritual bliss. Once we come to that point, the nature of that spiritual relational connection with the absolute truth or absolute person and my individual personality starts to unfold in 5 phases. Those 5 phases are: 1, neutral admiration without any kind of active mood of service. It's a natural appreciation and glorification of the absolute person. But there's no relational function that's present. The next iteration is called dasito. The first one is called shanta. It creates the greatest degree of bliss in relation to understanding myself and the absolute truth for the first time. That is called shanta. That creates a neutral kind of admiration for the absolute truth. But there's no active service or active understanding of how I'm related in service to the absolute truth. The next one is called dasya. Dasya means when the realization takes on the quality of inspiring in my spiritual identity a desire to serve that absolute person. That is called dasya. At that time, not only is the persona of the absolute truth revealed, but the quality, name, abode, etc. of the absolute truth becomes revealed. That again heightens the bliss, because all of this is just like in the material world. What are people inspired by in every single stage of their life? Why do they decide to go to school? They decide to continue their education. They decide to graduate, do postgraduate study, get a better degree, to get a better job. What is the aim and objective of it all? To get better and better material enjoyment, yes or no? So in the same way, the internal inspiration in spiritual life is also enjoyment, spiritual bliss. So the natural spiritual bliss that comes from each of these different stages of realization impels one to the next stage of realization. So now one realizes the name, the form, the abode, the qualities, the associates of God, as Lord Narayan, the opulent, all-powerful God, and one sees himself for the first time in the position called Das. Jivera Sarup Hoye Krishnera Nitya Das. So even though that's a constitutional reality, its first experience comes in this stage when one realizes I want to serve the absolute truth, who is personified as God or Lord Narayan. The next iteration of that is when the opulence of God is eclipsed by the degree of love that is being impelled in the heart by the mood of service. And one wants to serve God in such a way that a more intimate connection of service is desired. Then God manifests 3 different qualities, which are relations of intimacy with him, right? Him, her, because God is masculine and feminine principle, via 3 kinds of special relationships which exist beyond just the ideal of God being God. So let me give you an example, which is often given. If you know a high court judge, how the criminals will relate to that judge, how the legal officials and the police department, everyone relate to that judge in his official capacity is generally with respect, awe, and reverence, right? And I'm not counting the outliers, the people who hate the judge, whatever. I'm saying uh, in normal activity, the judge's position is respected, right? When that same judge goes to his own personal home, his own mother and father, his wife, his children, do they have the same kind of awe, reverence, and respect for him? Their respect is eclipsed by the kind of love they have for him. So that same judge, when he arrives home, the mother can still say, go take out the garbage. You understand? It may not be the norm, but the mother keeps an eternal or a permanent disposition of being mother. And therefore, the love which is inherent in that parental relationship could even dictate to that judge who's seen with so much respect and awe by his professional capacity, in his intimate familial capacity, is now seen in this light. The wife also will control in her own way by her conjugal love. The intimate friends of the judge will control by their fraternal love. You understand? So these three higher stages exist when God takes the persona of Sri Krishna. It is that same God who is now allowed the intimacy of relation based on the desire of the soul to serve to take on the quality of relationships that we experience here in this world, like parental affection, conjugal affection, fraternal affection, which are all intimate kinds of affection. God allows that to happen based on the intrinsic and inspired desire of the individual soul to serve him in that particular way. Now, somebody could say, but that sounds mundane because it sounds just like the material world. So then you have to ask the question, in the material world, please Google for me where the nuances in loving relationships, who created that? You can Google who discovered America. You can Google so many things, but please AI or Google for me who created the differentiations or nuances in various kinds of relationships. Call all the top psychologists in the world. They certainly must know. Where did this originate from? Why is there a distinction between parental love, conjugal love, fraternal love? Where did the nuances of that come from? Again, you can't have something in the creation that's not present in the absolute creator. Therefore, these original relationships are with divinity, and they're simply pervertedly reflected in the material arena. So now the soul has reached the actual understanding of its true spiritual identity. This is the answer to the question, who am I? In the highest degree. Now, once you come to that stage, not only do you have a cognition of being a spiritual person, but you're a spiritual person with a spiritual identity of name, form, dress, every single detail is manifest there about your spiritual personality. And that is your original and eternal identity. The knowledge of that original and eternal spiritual identity is covered, for lack of a better word, is covered by the absence of your spiritual nature being revealed to you, and by the feature of material ignorance, the identification with the material arena and your material identity. Because the material identity and the spiritual identity are like oil and water. They do not mix. They do not mix. So as long as a person holds on through the false egoism to a material identity, you can never realize your spiritual identity. But when you give up the hold by false ego on the material identity, and you utilize the facilities of those 23 elements I mentioned to turn towards serving God, and you start to practice under spiritual guidance the path of self-realization, gradually, that false egoism weakens, dries up because it's not being nourished by your emotional investment in it, and it eventually fades away, and the pure spiritual identity becomes manifest. So this is the answer posed from the question, who am I? So we'll open the floor for some questions and some comments before we call it a night here. Try not to make the time go too late. Yeah, I think we're good.
Yes,
Hari Bol, Prabhu. I'm sorry.
Oh, Dandavat Sham Prabhu. I'm looking forward to seeing you in the fall.
Please come. Let me know in advance so I can try to make some preparation, Prabhu. Thank you.
Ready?
Please do. I just wanted to make a quick comment if I could. I'm glad I was able to join in time, so I'm going to try to keep an eye on the rest of the sessions, because every time I hear from you, it just kind of, it's something about how the message that I can understand it. You know, I've been hearing this for many years in different ways, but when I hear from you, it's Tashani, it's practical. Let me just put it to you like that. You give a practical approach to this bhakti path. So thank you for that. Just wanted to make a comment really quickly about how you mentioned that our eternal position. And one of the things I remember hearing about, or not our eternal position, but our natural position, our swarup, I think that's what you were referring to, the more we develop on this path of bhakti. And one of the things as I was listening to you speak is that I used to wonder, like, what is my, what is that for me? What does that look like? But you know, what I discovered when I was thinking about that about myself is that, you know, whenever that's supposed to come, whenever Krishna decides to let me awaken to that, so be it. So I kind of just, you know, accepted the fact that that's not something I would know right away. But I'm more getting, I guess, enjoyment or rasa from this path itself, right? The practice itself, calling on the names of the Lord, and the different things that you mentioned about how the taste developed and the personal connection with Krishna once you develop to those different stages. I see that in different devotees from practical perspectives, and I'm praying that by the mercy of devotees like you and my mother and other examples, exemplary devotees, that I can achieve that goal. So thank you so much, Prabhu. I'm just glad to be here and hear from you today. Haribol.
Haribol. So certainly I think before the end of the session is like when we get to the how, because it is a very deep science of how the path of bhakti unfolds, the actual clarity of our spiritual identity. It's just a matter of how we are practicing. So practicing is not always about the perfection of numbers, the perfection of material sounds, the perfection of intellectual digestion. It's so much more about the inspiration coming in the heart, especially in connection with Guru. Guru is so important in this regard. The Guru is the agency that opens a portal. That portal, it's just like, I'll give you an example. In a room, a person, if all of the lights are off, there's complete darkness. But you can kind of reach your hands out and see that, well, there's a wall behind me. The color of the wall, the composition, whether it's wood or plaster or brick, I maybe could tell a little something, right? And I may be able to get some sense of the size of the room. So in the darkness, there's some slight perception. What Guru does is introduces us on the path of bhakti to almost what is like a dimmer switch. You know what a dimmer switch is? Like you hit that switch and then you can raise the illumination gradually. So in connection with Guru, when you're hearing Harikatha and you're hearing the science explained, the Guru being the agency of Bhagavan, because the Guru has no self-interest, and the aspirant or disciple being of open heart, having done Saranagati. It creates a portal by which that dimmer switch is gradually raised, and as the illumination becomes clearer and clearer, you not only see everything about the room, but when you look at your own hand, you see what color it is, you see how big it is, etc. So that's what begins to happen by doing the process of bhakti under the guidance and anugatya of realized Guru.
Hari Bol. Thank you, Prabhu.
Hari Bol. And then one last thing, in the deeper stages of that same illumination will manifest as what kind of relationship I have with Krishna. The seed of it will be given at the time of Diksha. At the second initiation, sometimes it's called, but the real name is Diksha. At that time, the seed is given. And then under continued guidance and meditation, the unfoldment, the illumination of that takes place, and it reveals 11 different elements of our actual spiritual identity. Gradually, gradually.
Thank you so much. Along those same lines, Prabhu, if you don't mind, I'm going to message you later I don't want to. I have some specific questions about some things that I'll reach out to you about. Thank you so much.
For sure, for sure.
Haribo, Dandavats, Mukunda.
Haribo, Chandrika Didi.
I have a question for you. So I'm still not quite so completely understanding what you had mentioned earlier about how animals do not acquire karma. Because, of course, being in the experience of the human material experience, we acquire karma, and we can acquire karma that is so negative that we can become animals. So how is it that animals can elevate beyond an animalistic experience into growing, growing further and further up the animal ladder, so to speak, and be have a human experience without them actually acquiring karma? How does that work if a soul is in a animal experience but they don't acquire karma?
Yes, because in the animal species, the consciousness is contracted. It's called Sankirna Chitta. The word Sankirna means contracted. So the contraction of the consciousness only allows them to do the functions of survival: eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. But there are nuances to every soul that's in those bodies. So though they don't create karma because they act strictly within their nature, animals don't act outside of their nature.
Mm,
You understand?
that's right.
Human beings can act outside of their nature.
Yes.
That's the big difference. So because they're acting in their nature, there's a natural evolutionary process. The human being, when they come to this point, because the consciousness is expanded, and the expansion of the consciousness is meant to be able to accommodate spiritual realization, when they don't do that, but they sophisticate and make variations out of eating, sleeping, mating, and defending, and then do sinful life and all these things, there's a karmic debt to pay for that.
Uh-huh. I see. Okay.
It's like, that's
That's
what credit card example. When you get a credit card, a lot of people don't read the small print. There's an annual interest fee. Nobody reads that.
true.
Right? You start using the card and so forth, so on. Then you get, what do you get in the mail? A bill. That's the karma that's proposed. You understand?
Okay. That's like what I was explaining to somebody else before about this topic. And I was saying how, we should use our free will to have spiritual life. Because whenever you have an animal experience, you can't do that because you don't have the free will, because everything is based on instinct, right? Like you just said, it's just based on, the order of things, because we can choose whenever we want to eat, whenever we want to bathe and do all kinds of things. But with animal life, everything's based on a set time and instinct and all that. So, okay. Thank you.
Last thing before I go to your mom is that there are some amazing things. I was giving a lecture at the University of Lusaka in Zambia, in Africa. This was like so many years ago. And I was explaining this phenomenon, that the different bodies in the animal species are better suited to accommodate certain sensual activity. Like, we cannot eat any and everything. Our digestive system is not meant for it.
Right.
Similarly, we cannot eat in the volume that some animal bodies can. So eating, sleeping, like a bear can sleep for 6 months, our bodies can't do that. You understand? So I mentioned also, even in the greatest material thing, which is sex life, so to speak, some bird species have sex 27 times a day. Somebody raises their hand and they always say, then I want to be an eagle, right? So if he has that mindset in the next life, then, God will grant, okay, then here you can be an eagle, because if your absorption is like that, here you can be whatever it is you want to accommodate that facility.
Oh, wow.
You understand? Because karma, you have to remember, is based on two things: action and aspiration. So your desires and your actions culminate in a particular karmic portfolio.
Okay, and aspiration. I didn't know that. Okay.
Yep. Radha?
Haribol, Gurudev. I want to first of all thank you for this discussion. It's extremely powerful and enlightening. My question is, how do I balance the integration of the soul with the 23 factors and my karmic portfolio to minimize suffering. Is that possible?
So yes, what the process of bhakti does is it creates a engagement of those 23 elements in a progressive path towards illumination. That's why we put a combination of what's called vyavyaharik or external life with our internal life. But we situate ourselves consciously in the internal. So the verse says, antara nishtakara. So the word nishta means fixed. The word kara means doing. Antara means the soul. So antara nishtakara, doing everything from the basis and through the prism of the soul, but bayalok vyavyahar. Bayalok means in the material world, like you have to go to work, you have a business, you have a family, etc. To the external world, we do the appropriate things for existence of this body within the arena of the material world. Like you have to pay your bill. Like when your rent comes due, you can't tell the person, oh, right? So we function in the material world, but we don't allow that function to dominate our internal space. The real temple, the real place of our worship is our own heart. So every morning that we're chanting, every time we're hearing from Guru, every time we're doing seva of any sort in regards to bhakti, the Hridaya Mandir, or the temple of the heart, is that location. That's where we live.
Understood.
And we look at everything through the prism of that space. So nobody really sees Radha necessarily. Right? I had 2 careers in my life, one in law enforcement, one in music. And people saw either the musician Akindra Das, or people saw the law enforcement officer, Eric Average, whatever it is. You understand? And only those people who become closer could get a glimpse of who's Mukunda Das.
I see.
But I'm not leaving Mukunda Das to go and entertain being Akindra and Eric Ackridge for these people. You understand?
I do. Haribol.
That's the secret. Haribol. Any other questions? Harinamananda Prabhu, you were going to say something in the beginning?
I was just gonna tell people to unmute themselves. But
Okay.
you mentioned the temple in the heart, and then you mentioned Hirai. Where is that? I know it's not the Shishashkam, but it tells about cleaning or preparing the throne for Krishna to sit on the heart.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
in Shashastra.
Okay.
Chaitodapamajanam Bhava
That's
Mahadavam Ningnavarpanam Shvekaya Ravachandrika Vitanam Vijvadu Jivanam. Yes, it's speaking about the cleansing of the heart. Also, there's one bhajan like that. Mano Mano Mandire Rahani Shiden Krishna Murari Sri Krishna Murari. It says that the Lord should permanently come and reside in my heart. And there, day and night, Raha Nishidin. Nishidin means day and night. I'll perform my meditation and worship in the association of the Lord in my heart. You understand?